Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This is Fahmina Umar, Divisional Public School and Intermediate College, Lahore. My dear students, before going through today's discussion, let's recap our previous lecture. We discussed about biodiversity, major climate zones, importance of biodiversity, classification, its aims and principles, taxonomic hierarchy, and species, the basic unit of classification. Let's start with history of classification systems. History of classification starts with the name of a great Greek philosopher, Aristotle. He classified all living organisms known at that time as either in the group Plantae or in Animalia. So, according to Aristotle, all living organisms are either plants or animals. He considered all living organisms that are non-motile, that is, they do not exhibit locomotion, as plants. And all organisms that are able to show mobility were regarded as animals by him. He categorized plants on the basis of size as trees, shrubs, and herbs. Animals were classified on the basis of habitat, morphology, red-blooded, and bloodless. Second prominent name in the history of classification is of Abu Usman Umar al-Jahiz. He characterized 350 species of animals in his textbooks. He wrote a lot about the life of ants. These are few lines written in your textbook about this great Muslim taxonomist. Let me briefly introduce you more about the contribution of Al-Jahiz. Al-Jahiz gave the concept of evolution 1,000 years before Darwin did. Let's go through a few lines from his book. He wrote, "Animals engage in a struggle for existing and for resources to avoid being eaten and to breed and continued. Environmental factors influence organisms to develop new characteristics to ensure survival, thus transforming them into new species. Animals that survive to breed can pass on their successful characteristics to their offsprings." My dear students, these were the findings of a Muslim taxonomist, which after 1,000 years came out as theory of evolution by natural selection, given by Charles Darwin. Next in the list is another great Muslim philosopher and physician, Ibn Rushd, famous as Averroes in Europe. He translated Aristotle's book De Anima in Arabic. Let's go a little beyond your textbook and have a look on contributions of this great Islamic philosopher. Averroes, who served as the royal physician at the Almohad court, wrote a number of medical treatises. The most famous was Al-Kulliyat fi at-Tibb, the general principles of medicine. It was actually a medical encyclopedia. The Latin translation of his book became a medical textbook in Europe for centuries. Now look how Europe has followed Muslim scientists in past. Averroes was a reconciler of Aristotle and Islam. He translated Aristotle's work in Arabic. His Arabic translations then further translated in Latin language. Latin translations of Ibn Rushd led to the popularization of Aristotle in Europe. Another prominent name in the history of classification systems is Carlos Linnaeus. He was a Swedish botanist, zoologist, and physician. Carlos Linnaeus divided nature into 3 kingdoms: mineral, vegetable, and animal. Linnaeus used 5 ranks in classification: class, order, genus, species, and variety. Linnaeus is best known for his introduction of the method still used to formulate the scientific name of every species. This quote by Linnaeus would make you clear on what basis Linnaeus divided living organisms. According to him, natural bodies are divided into 3 kingdoms of nature: the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms. Minerals grow, plants grow and live. Animals grow, live, and have feelings. Further names enlisted in history of classification include Andrei Cisalpino. He divided plants into 15 groups and called them genera. John Ray published important works on plants classification. Augustus Rivenus introduced the taxon of order. Toniford introduced the taxa of class and species. Carlos Linnaeus grouped species according to similar physical characteristics. Let's discuss another important topic of this chapter, that is classification systems. Biologists prefer such a system that can provide maximum information about the basic differences and similarities among different organisms. According to earlier classification system, organisms were classified into two kingdoms, but now taxonomists agree on five-kingdom classification system. We'll see the basis of these classification systems and the drawbacks in the two-kingdom and three-kingdom classification systems. Two-kingdom classification system. In the oldest system of classification, Aristotle divided living organisms into kingdoms on the basis of very general characteristics of mobility and external morphology. Then Carlos Linnaeus presented two-kingdom classification system that was based on more specific characteristics. He divided living organisms in two kingdoms, that is Plantae and Animalia. According to Carlos, organisms that are able to make their own food by using simple inorganic materials and thus can store energy, that is, they exhibit autotrophic mode of nutrition. They have cell wall and do not show mobility, were regarded as plants. While all those organisms that cannot synthesize their own food and depend on other organisms for food do not have cell wall around their cells and do show locomotion were considered animals. According to this system, bacteria, fungi, and algae were placed in kingdom Plantae. With the invent of microscope, more knowledge gathered about lower organisms, and the two-kingdom classification system became inadequate and unsatisfactory. The drawbacks of two-kingdom classification system are listed. Many unicellular organisms like Euglena have both plant-like and animal-like characteristics. Look at this figure. Euglena can move with the help of a flagellum. It do not have cell wall around the cell. By these two characters, it resembles animals, but at the same time, it resembles plants for having chloroplasts and being able to photosynthesize in the presence of light. However, in the absence of light, it acquires heterotrophic mode of nutrition. Due to all these peculiar characteristics, it was suggested that these organisms like Euglena that have characteristics both like plants and animals should be placed in a separate kingdom. So there should be a separate kingdom for such organisms. Secondly, this system also ignores the difference between organisms having prokaryotic and those having eukaryotic cells. Now, let's briefly discuss what is the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. You will discuss this difference in detail in chapter number 4 of your textbook. Prokaryotes are the organisms that consist of a prokaryotic cell, for example, bacteria. Prokaryotic cell is a simple cell that do not contain a membrane-bound definite nucleus. Their chromosome is suspended in cytoplasm, forming a structure called nucleoid. They do not contain any membrane-bound organelles. In contrast to Prokaryotes. Eukaryotes are the organisms that consist of a eukaryotic cell, for example, protists, plants, animals, and fungi. It means except bacteria, all other living organisms are eukaryotes, that is, they consist of a eukaryotic cell. Eukaryotic cell is a complex cell that do contain a membrane-bound definite nucleus. Their chromosomes are enclosed by the nucleus. Furthermore, they contain a variety of membrane-bound organelles. Due to drawbacks in two-kingdom classification system, Ernest Haeckel came up with a three-kingdom classification system. He solved the first problem by placing Euglena-like organisms that show ambiguity in their characters. That is, they resemble both the plants and animals in a separate kingdom. So Ernest Haeckel divided living organisms in three kingdoms: Protista, containing all unicellular organisms. Bacteria were also placed in Protista, Plantae, and Animalia. Fungi were still included in kingdom Plantae. Let's have a look on drawbacks of three-kingdom classification system, on the basis of which this system was rejected. As prokaryotes, that is bacteria, were placed in kingdom Protista along with eukaryotic unicellular organisms, this system did not clear the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Some biologists disagree about the position of fungi in kingdom Plantae. Fungi resemble plants in many ways, but are not autotrophs. They are special form of heterotrophs that get their food by absorption. They do not have cellulose in their cell walls. Rather, their cell walls are made up of chitin. The drawbacks of three-kingdom classification system made the basis for five-kingdom classification system. In 1937, Edward Chatton suggested the terms of prokaryotic to describe bacteria and eukaryotic to describe animal and plant cells. In 1967, Robert Whittaker introduced five-kingdom classification system. Five-kingdom classification system was based on two criterions. According to first criteria, organisms exhibit three levels of cellular organization. That is, organisms that are prokaryotic, then unicellular eukaryotic organisms, and multicellular eukaryotic organisms. According to the second criterion, the principal modes of nutrition are also different among different living organisms. Some photosynthesize their own food, some get food by absorption, and some have ingestive mode of nutrition. According to these criterions, bacteria were placed in a separate kingdom called kingdom Monera. It is also famous as bacterial kingdom or prokaryotic kingdom. Fungi also elevated to kingdom rank due to their heterotrophic and absorptive mode of nutrition. So in five-kingdom classification system, the living biota of the world can be divided into five kingdoms. Kingdom Monera, containing prokaryotic organisms. Protista, having unicellular and simple multicellular. Fungi, heterotrophs with absorptive mode of nutrition. Plantae, multicellular, complex, and autotrophs. Animal, multicellular, complex animals. We can divide these five kingdoms into two groups on the basis of cellular organization. Kingdom Monera is the only prokaryotic kingdom. All four remaining kingdoms are eukaryotic kingdoms. In 1988, Margulis and Schwartz also tried to classify organisms on the basis of genetics, along with cellular organization and mode of nutrition, but came up with the same five kingdoms as proposed by Whittaker. Let's discuss each kingdom in detail. First is the kingdom Monera. the kingdom of prokaryotic organisms. It includes prokaryotic organisms, that is, they are made up of prokaryotic cells. Monerans are unicellular, although some types form chains, clusters, or colonies of cells. In this picture, you can see unicellular bacteria. They may also exist in the form of chains or making clusters or colonies of cells. Prokaryotic cells are radically different from eukaryotic cells, as we have discussed earlier. Most are heterotrophic, but some perform photosynthesis because they have chlorophyll in their cytoplasm. Within this kingdom, there are two kinds of organisms, that is bacteria and cyanobacteria. Bacteria are mostly heterotrophs, and cyanobacteria, they contain chlorophyll and are able to photosynthesize, so they are autotrophs. Kingdom Protista. Kingdom Protista is the most diverse kingdom amongst the four eukaryotic kingdoms. It can also be regarded as junk kingdom because organisms that due to their peculiar characteristics cannot fit in either of the three eukaryotic kingdoms are placed in this kingdom. For example, we have earlier discussed about Euglena that resembles to both plants and animals. Due to its resemblance to animals, it cannot be placed with plants. And due to its resemblance to plants, it cannot be placed with animals. All such organisms whose exact fate is not clear are placed in kingdom Protista. There are three main types of protists. Protists that resemble more to plants are called plant-like protists, collectively regarded as algae. The protists that resemble more to animals are called animal-like protists, and they are collectively regarded as protozoans. Then there are fungi-like protists. Algae are unicellular, colonial, or simple multicellular. They resemble plant cells with cell walls and chlorophyll in chloroplasts. By simple multicellular means that they do not have multicellular sex organs and do not form embryos during their life cycles. Protozoans resemble animals as they show mobility, and their cells lack cell walls. They mostly lack chlorophyll, but some protists may contain chlorophyll, like Euglena. Some protists are fungi-like. Kingdom Fungi. It includes eukaryotic multicellular heterotrophs, which are absorptive in their nutritional mode, for example, mushrooms. You have often seen these caps growing in your nearby damp areas. Most fungi are decomposers, that is, they live on organic material, secrete digestive enzymes, and absorb small organic molecules formed by the digestion by enzymes. Decomposition is the process by which dead organic substances are broken down into simpler organic or inorganic matter, such as carbon dioxide, water, simple sugars, and mineral salts. In this picture, you can see fungi growing on a falling log. Fungi secrete digestive enzymes to break down the complex organic compounds into simpler ones. In this way, all the nutrients that are locked up in the bodies of organisms are returned back to soil. Being decomposers, fungi are also regarded as natural recyclers along with algae and bacteria. Kingdom Plantae. It includes eukaryotic multicellular autotrophs. Plants are autotrophic in nutritional mode, making their own food by the process of photosynthesis. They have multicellular sex organs and form embryos during their life cycles. You have learnt in grade 7 and 8 that flowers are reproductive structures of flowering plants. In a flower, this globose structure is called ovary. It contains female gamete, and this structure is called anther. It contains male gametes in the form of pollen grains. These structures are regarded as multicellular sex organs that protect the male and female gametes inside them. These structures are completely absent in algae. This is plant embryo. This structure is enclosed in seeds. Embryo contains three structures: the embryonic shoot, the embryonic root, and cotyledons. Embryo of a plant that is enclosed in a seed can be regarded as plant baby. Mosses, ferns, and flowering plants are included in this kingdom. My dear students, algae also resemble plants for being eukaryotic and autotrophic, that is, can synthesize their own food by the process of photosynthesis. Even this resemblance, algae cannot be placed in kingdom Plantae because they differ plants for not having multicellular sex organs and they do not form embryos during their life cycles. On the basis of these differences, algae are not considered plants, rather, they are regarded as ancestors of plants and placed in kingdom Protista. Kingdom Animalia, the kingdom we belong to. It includes eukaryotic multicellular consumers. Animals live mostly by ingesting food and digesting it within specialized cavities. They lack cell wall and show locomotion. Like all animals, protozoans have eukaryotic cells, meaning cells with a nucleus and a membrane-bound organelles. They are, with a few exceptions, motile, either using cilia or flagella to move about or by simply oozing from one place to another, as in case of amoeba. Being single cell, they lack complex organs and organ systems and division of labor. Therefore, not considered animals, rather considered as ancestors of animals and placed in kingdom Protista. Phylogenetic tree of life. According to biologists, in phylogenetic tree of life, monerans form the base. That is, monerans are the earliest organisms and ancestors of all other living organisms. Or we can also say all eukaryotic kingdoms have actually arisen from prokaryotic bacteria. Monerans paved the way for Protista. Plant-like protist, that is algae, gave rise to the modern-day plants. Animal-like protists, that are protozoans, are the ancestors of highly evolved and complex animals. And fungi-like protists gave rise to fungi. Here, distinguishing characters of all five kingdoms are tabulated for you. Status of viruses. Viruses are at the borderline of living and non-living. That is, they are considered a link between living and non-living things. Due to their crystalline nature, they are considered as non-living. They are acellular, that is, they do not have cellular organization, yet show some characters of living organisms. For example, they possess DNA. Viruses contain either RNA or DNA, normally encased in protein coat. In this picture, you can see structure of different viruses. Each have DNA and RNA enclosed in a protein coat. They reproduce only in living cells where they cause a number of diseases. Here you can see mode of action of a viral particle, how it gets enter into the cell, halts its machinery. The cell starts synthesizing viral particles, and viral particles rupture the cell and infect the neighboring cells. They are not considered as organisms and thus are not included in five kingdom classification system. Prions and viroids are also acellular particles and are not included in five kingdom classification system. Prions and viroids. Prions and viroids are actually infectious molecules. Prions are composed of protein only, and viroids are composed of circular RNA only. Both these particles cause infectious diseases in certain plants. Let's have a look on some important questions from this section of the chapter. Remaining topics of this chapter would be discussed in next lecture, inshallah. For queries, you can comment in comment box. Thank you.